I was declared dead for 10 minutes and saw my husband's real face. There is a moment the doctors told me later when my heart stopped completely. 10 minutes and 14 seconds. No pulse, no breath. Flat line on the monitor. The nurse on duty that night said she stepped back from the bed and thought, she's gone. But I wasn't gone. And the strange, horrible gift of those 10 minutes is that I came back knowing something I was never supposed to find out. I came back knowing what my husband had done while I was dying. Before I tell you what I saw, and I will tell you everything, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I read every single one, and I love knowing where you are when you're listening to this. I'm Caroline. I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of what happens when the person who is supposed to love you most decides that your death is more convenient than your life. Let me take you back to the beginning, because what happened in that hospital room didn't start there. It started 7 years earlier, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown, where I was presenting quarterly numbers to a room full of people who weren't listening, except one. His name was Daniel Voss, 34 years old, dark hair going a little silver at the temples, the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't announce itself. He was a consultant brought in to assess the company's financial structure. He sat at the end of the table with a legal pad and a pen, and he was the only person in that room who wrote down everything I said. After the meeting, he waited until everyone else had filed out and said, "Your third quarter projection is off by about 12%. Not a criticism, just an observation." I told him I knew, that I'd flagged it to my manager twice and been told not to worry about it. He said, "You should worry about it." I said, "I know." We had coffee the following afternoon. We were together within 2 months, married within 2 years. Daniel was meticulous, careful, steady. An architect of systems, financial, personal, domestic. Our home was organized, our finances were structured. Our life together had a shape to it, clean and deliberate, like a building that had been properly engineered. I loved that about him. Or I loved what I believed it meant about him. I thought steadiness was the same as loyalty. I thought a man who built things carefully would never tear them down without warning. I was wrong about that. We had been married for 5 years when I got sick. It started as fatigue. The kind you dismiss because you're busy and 36 and there are 100 explanations for being tired. Then came the headaches, deep and persistent, settling behind my left eye in a way that felt structural, like something was pressing from the inside. My doctor ordered an MRI. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store. The doctor's voice was careful in the way doctors' voices get when they're about to change the shape of your life. An arteriovenous malformation, a tangle of blood vessels in the brain, present since birth, that had decided after 36 years to start causing problems. Not immediately life-threatening, the doctor said, but requiring monitoring, possibly surgery, depending on how things developed. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. I called Daniel from the car. He was quiet while I talked. When I finished, he said, "Okay, we'll figure it out. Tell me what you need." That night, he researched for 3 hours. He made a list of questions for the specialist. He came to every appointment for the first 4 months. And then, gradually, he stopped coming. Not all at once. First, it was one appointment he couldn't make because of a work conflict. Then 2. Then I stopped mentioning them because I didn't want to feel like a burden. And he stopped asking because I understand now. He had already started calculating. Let me pause here and ask you something, because I think some of you already know where this is going. And some of you are hoping you're wrong. Have you ever looked back on a relationship and seen the exact moment the other person decided to stop investing? Not a fight, not an event. Just a quiet withdrawal that you explained away because the alternative was too painful to name. Tell me in the comments, because what I'm about to describe is that moment, and I missed it completely. 8 months after my diagnosis, I had a seizure. I was home alone. I came to on the kitchen floor with no memory of falling. I called Daniel first. He didn't answer. I called my neighbor Vera, who drove me to the emergency room, held my hand through 3 hours of tests, and stayed until the neurologist had spoken to me. Daniel arrived 2 hours after Vera called him. He was calm, attentive. He spoke to the doctors, He drove me home. That night I woke up at 2 in the morning and Daniel wasn't in bed. I found him in the study, laptop open, phone in hand. He closed both when he heard me in the doorway. Couldn't sleep, he said. Worried about you. I believed him. 3 weeks later, my doctor recommended surgery. The malformation had shifted. The risk of leaving it was now higher than the risk of operating. The procedure was complex, but the surgeon was experienced. The odds were good. I want to tell you something about the night before my surgery, because it matters to what came after. Daniel and I had dinner at home. He cooked, which he rarely did. Pasta with the good olive oil, a bottle of wine we'd been saving. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. He told me stories about his childhood I hadn't heard before. He held my hand across the table. He said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that you changed my life." I thought he was scared of losing me. I understand now what he was actually doing. He was saying goodbye. The surgery was scheduled for 7 in the morning. I was prepped and ready. Daniel kissed my forehead in the pre-op room, squeezed my hand, said he'd be right there when I woke up. I didn't wake up for 11 hours. There were complications during the procedure. A vessel that behaved unexpectedly. A pressure drop. The team worked for 4 hours longer than anticipated. And at some point during those hours, my heart stopped. 10 minutes and 14 seconds. They brought me back. The surgeon told me later it was one of the most demanding cases of his career, and that the outcome was, in his words, something between skill and luck. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was dim. Evening light through the blinds. Machines beeping softly. My throat raw from the breathing tube. I turned my head. Daniel was not in the room. My sister Nora was. She was asleep in the chair beside the bed, her coat still on, her hand inches from mine on the blanket. She woke up the moment I moved, and she made a sound I will never forget. Something between a sob and a laugh. And she grabbed my hand and said, "You're here. You're here." I asked for Daniel. Nora's face did something complicated, just for a second, before she arranged it back into calm. "He stepped out," she said. "I'll text him." He came in 12 minutes later, flushed, a little breathless, like he'd been moving quickly. He kissed my forehead. He said, "I'm so glad you're okay. I was so scared. I was too weak to ask questions." I closed my eyes and let myself be taken care of. But I had seen Nora's face. And I had filed it away in the part of my brain that was already, even through the fog of anesthesia and relief, starting to understand that something was wrong. I was in the hospital for 9 days. Daniel visited every evening. He brought things I needed, spoke to the doctors, handled the insurance calls. He was the picture of a devoted husband. Everyone said so. The nurses commented on it. My mother called him a rock. On day 6, my friend Patrice came to visit. Patrice has been my friend since college. The kind of friend who tells you the truth, even when it costs her something. She sat beside my bed and talked for an hour about nothing important. Her kids, a renovation she was doing, a show she was watching. As she was leaving, she stopped at the door and turned around. She had the look on her face that I recognized. The one that meant she'd been deciding whether to say something for the last 60 minutes. "Caro," she said, "there's something I think you should know." She told me carefully, in pieces the way you tell someone, something that might shatter them. She had seen Daniel 3 weeks before my surgery, not in passing, in a restaurant across town, at a corner table with a woman Patrice didn't recognize. They were not having a business dinner. She knew what business dinners looked like. This was not that. She had almost told me then. She talked herself out of it twice. Then I had my surgery and nearly died. And she had sat with the information for 6 days in that hospital waiting room, and she could not carry it anymore. I lay in that bed, and I felt something move through me. Not shock, not devastation. Something older and quieter. The feeling of a thing clicking into place that has been slightly out of alignment for a long time. I asked Patrice one question. What did she look like? Patrice described her. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair. The way she'd leaned across the table when Daniel spoke. The way he'd touched her hand without looking around the room first. The casual confidence of a man who did not believe he would be seen. I thanked Patrice. I told her she'd done the right thing. After she left, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I asked the nurse for a pen and a notepad. and I started writing things down. I want to pause here for a moment, because this is the part of the story where I made a decision that determined everything that came after. I was lying in a hospital bed 8 days out of brain surgery, physically the weakest I had ever been in my life. And I made the choice not to react. Not yet. I want to ask you something directly. If you were in that bed, if you had just been told that while you were in surgery, while your heart had literally stopped, your husband had been somewhere else with someone else, what would your first move be? Because mine was to pick up a pen and start building a case. Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading. Here is what I knew when I left that hospital. I had a brain condition that carried a real possibility of future complications. I had a husband who had been pulling away for almost a year. I had a witness who had seen him with another woman. And I had the memory of Nora's face in that hospital room. That half second of complicated expression before she smoothed it over. Nora knew something. I was certain of it. I waited until I was home and physically stable before I talked to her. 10 days after discharge, Daniel had gone to the office. I called Nora and asked her to come over. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I watched her the way I had learned to watch people, quietly, without pressure, giving the silence room to work. I said, "Nora, tell me what happened when I was in surgery." She held out for about 45 seconds. Then she told me. Daniel had left the hospital at hour 3 of the surgery. He told the nurse he needed air, that he'd be back. He came back at hour 7, 4 hours unaccounted for, while his wife was on an operating table with her skull open. Nora had been in the waiting room the entire time. She had covered for him when the surgeon came out at hour 5 with an update. She had told the doctor that Daniel had just stepped away and would be right back. She had called Daniel, and he had not answered for 40 minutes. "Why did you cover for him?" I asked. "Because I didn't know what was happening," she said. "And I didn't want to make things worse when we didn't know if you were going to..." She stopped. Her eyes filled. I didn't want to make things worse. I reached across the table and held her hand. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I meant it. Then I told her what Patrice had told me. Nora closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she said, "I'm so sorry, Caro." I said, "Don't be sorry. Help me." Over the next 6 weeks, I built the case quietly and completely. I want to walk you through it because I think this part matters. The methodology of it, the patience of it, the way I kept showing up to my own life while dismantling the lie underneath it. I requested our shared bank statements, going back 18 months. I had full access to our joint accounts. This was not a secret. Daniel had always been transparent about finances, which I now understood was because he kept the other account somewhere I hadn't thought to look. The joint statements were clean, but in going through them carefully, I found a pattern. A regular transfer out every 2 weeks to an account labeled simply VM Consulting. I had assumed VM Consulting was a vendor of some kind. I had never questioned it. VM Consulting did not exist. I checked. There was no registered business by that name in our state. I hired a forensic accountant named Ruth Chen. She was recommended by a friend of Patrice's, a woman who had been through her own version of this. Ruth was 53 years old, 2 inches shorter than me, and had the energy of someone who had seen every possible variety of human financial deception, and was no longer surprised by any of it. Ruth found the second account in 4 days. It was registered in Daniel's name and opened 14 months ago, 2 months after my diagnosis. The VM Consulting transfers had been building it steadily. The balance when Ruth found it was just under $90,000. $90,000. Moved quietly, methodically. Over 14 months, beginning 2 months after he learned I might die. I sat with that number for a long time. Ruth also found the lease. An apartment across town, signed 11 months ago. Paid monthly from the second account. The name on the lease was Daniel Voss. The name of the secondary occupant listed on the building's resident form, which Ruth obtained through channels she didn't explain in detail, was a woman named Sophia Arundel. Sophia Arundel, 29 years old. The woman Patrice had seen in the restaurant. I looked her up. She wasn't difficult to find. A LinkedIn profile, an Instagram that was public, a life that looked, from the outside, like the life of someone who was not aware that the man she was building it with had a wife recovering from brain surgery across town. Or perhaps she was aware. I didn't know yet. I would find out. Here is what I had. 6 weeks after leaving the hospital. Bank statements showing 14 months of systematic financial preparation. A second account with $90,000. A lease on an apartment. The name of the woman. Nora's testimony about the 4 missing hours during my surgery. And Patrice's account of the restaurant. I also had one more thing. I had my medical records. Specifically, the section documenting the 10 minutes and 14 seconds during which my heart had stopped. The section that showed, to the minute, what time that had occurred. And I had Daniel's phone records, which Ruth had obtained legally through our joint phone plan account. During those 10 minutes, while the team was working to restart my heart, Daniel's phone had been active, not on a call, sending messages. 12 text messages in 11 minutes to a number I recognized from the second account records as Sophia Arundale's phone. I don't know what those messages said. The content wasn't recoverable through the phone plan records, but the timestamps were there. 12 messages. While his wife's heart was stopped. I sat with that evidence for 3 days. I read it, put it away, read it again. I thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean. And I came to a conclusion that felt very clear and very cold. I was not going to carry this privately. I was not going to have a quiet conversation and accept a quiet settlement and disappear from my own story. Whatever Daniel had been planning, and the evidence suggested he had been planning something, he was going to have to account for it where people could see. I called my attorney. Her name is Margaret Osei. I had met her 3 years earlier at a fundraiser and liked her immediately. She was precise, unhurried, and had a way of listening that made you feel that every word was being properly registered. I laid everything in front of her. She looked at the documents for a long time. Then she looked at me. She said, "Do you want to leave him quietly, or do you want the truth on the record?" I said, "I want the truth on the record." She nodded once. She said, "Then we do this right. I want to tell you now about the dinner party. Daniel and I had a standing tradition with 4 other couples, people we'd known for years. A rotating dinner party that moved between houses. It was our turn to host. The date had been set for 2 months. I had, in the fog of recovery, almost cancelled it. Daniel had encouraged me to keep it. He said it would be good for me to be around people. He said I needed to get back to normal. I kept the dinner. What Daniel didn't know was that Margaret had, 3 days prior, filed the divorce petition. Properly, quietly, with every piece of evidence attached. He hadn't been served yet. That was scheduled for the following morning. He also didn't know that I had invited 2 additional guests. Ruth Chen, my forensic accountant, and Patrice. There were 12 people at the table that night. Daniel was at the head, relaxed, pouring wine, the charming version of himself that he deployed at social occasions. I watched him from the other end of the table, and I thought about the 10 minutes during which my heart had stopped, and he had sent 12 messages to another woman. I waited until after the main course. I stood up. I said I had something I wanted to share, and that I was sorry in advance for making the evening strange, but that I had been carrying something heavy for several weeks, and I didn't want to carry it alone anymore. The table went quiet. I looked at Daniel. I said, 14 months ago, 2 months after I was diagnosed with a brain condition, you opened a second bank account. You transferred money into it every 2 weeks for 14 months. The balance is currently just under $90,000. The room was completely still. I said, 11 months ago, you signed a lease on an apartment across town. A woman named Sophia Arundale is listed as a secondary occupant. Daniel's face had gone through several changes in the last 30 seconds. It had settled now into something careful and closed. I said, 6 weeks ago, during my surgery, your heart left that waiting room 4 hours before your body did. And during the 10 minutes that my heart stopped, you sent 12 messages to Sophia Arundale's phone. I placed a folder in the center of the table. Ruth reached over and opened it. The bank statements, the lease, the phone records, the timestamps. 12 pages clearly labeled. I looked at Daniel one more time. I said, I came back from those 10 minutes knowing that something was wrong. It took me 6 weeks to find out exactly what. I want you to know that I have it all. Margaret has it all, and tomorrow morning, you'll be served with the petition. Daniel said nothing. Around the table, no one moved. Sandra, who had been our friend for 9 years, set down her wine glass very carefully. Her husband put his hand over hers. I said to the room, I'm sorry for doing this here, but I needed witnesses, and I needed to say it out loud, in front of people who know us, because I think the truth deserves an audience when it has been hidden long enough. Then I sat back down. Patrice, from across the table, raised her glass toward me slightly. Not a toast, just an acknowledgement. Daniel left the table 5 minutes later without speaking. I heard the front door close. The remaining guests stayed for another 2 hours. Sandra washed dishes. Her husband, Michael, without being asked, carried the folder to my office and set it carefully on the desk. People said the kinds of things people say when they don't have adequate language for what they've witnessed. I let them. After everyone left, I sat alone at the table with the remaining wine. And I thought about the 10 minutes. I have thought about what I experienced during those 10 minutes many times. And I'm careful about how I describe it, because I don't want to overstate it or make it into something it wasn't. I did not see a bright light. I did not encounter anyone. What I experienced was a feeling of radical clarity, like a room that had been cluttered for years was suddenly completely empty. And in that empty room, I could see something I had been unable to see before. I saw the shape of my own life, what it had been and what it could be. I don't know if that was neurological or something else. I'm not sure it matters. What I know is that I came back from those 10 minutes understanding, with a certainty I had never had before, that I was not willing to spend the rest of my life being someone's contingency plan. Now I need to tell you the twist, the part I did not see coming, the part that changed how I understood everything, even the parts I thought I already understood. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Margaret called me with something unexpected. She had been in contact with Sophia Arundale's attorney. Sophia had not known Daniel was married. I want to let that land for a moment, because it took me several days to fully process it. Daniel had told Sophia he was a widower. His wife, he told her, had died 2 years ago. A brain condition. Tragic. He was still grieving. He had shown her photographs. I learned later they were real photographs of me from before I got sick, framed as memories. Sophia had been in a relationship with a man she believed to be a widower, building a life with him, moving into an apartment with him, and she had known nothing about the woman who was very much alive across town. When Sophia found out, when Daniel was served and her attorney became involved and the truth came out, she terminated all contact with him immediately. Her attorney reached out to Margaret not in opposition, but in something closer to solidarity. Sophia requested through Margaret to speak with me. I thought about it for a week. Then I said yes. We met at a coffee shop on a neutral street that neither of us had any association with. She was exactly as Patrice had described. Dark hair, careful posture, the particular composure of someone holding themselves together through an effort. She apologized first, at length and with a directness that I respected. I told her that I believed she had nothing to apologize for, that she had been deceived as thoroughly as I had, and in some ways more completely. She said, "He told me you were gone. He said your name was Caroline, and that you loved pasta and hated the cold, and that he wished he'd told you more often how remarkable you were." I sat with that. I said, he wasn't lying about all of it. We didn't become friends. That would be too neat. And this story is not a neat one. But we had coffee for 90 minutes, and when we left, we both knew something important. That we had both been pieces in someone else's architecture, and that neither of us had agreed to the blueprint. Daniel contested the divorce for 5 months. Margaret was patient and thorough, and everything he contested she addressed with documentation. In the end, the settlement included the return of the $90,000 from the second account, plus the marital share of assets we'd built over 7 years. He moved out of the house on a Tuesday. I watched the moving truck from the window. I felt, watching it, something I want to describe precisely because I think it matters. Not triumph, not grief. Something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a foundation becoming solid beneath you. The feeling of weight redistributed properly. I am 2 years out from that surgery now. My neurologist monitors the remaining malformation every 6 months. The latest scan was stable. I take the medication. I go to my appointments. I sleep well. I live alone in the house and I have made it entirely mine. I painted the study the color I wanted and Daniel never would have agreed to. I reorganized the kitchen. I bought a chair for the reading corner that is comfortable in the specific way he always said was unnecessary. Nora comes for dinner on Sundays. Patrice and I have standing coffee on Thursday mornings. Ruth Chen sent me a plant when the divorce was finalized. It is doing remarkably well. I think about the 10 minutes sometimes, the flat line, the team working to bring me back, the room full of people fighting for me while the person who had promised to do the same was somewhere else. I think about what those 10 minutes gave me, not just the clarity in that empty room, the gift of coming back knowing that I had almost not, the strange and brutal privilege of that knowledge. Most people don't get to feel the full weight of their own life while they're still in it. I got 10 minutes of that, and I used every second. Here's what I want to leave you with. You are allowed to build a case before you blow it open. You are allowed to grieve and gather evidence at the same time. You're allowed to sit across the table from someone who is lying to you and smile and pass the bread and not show your hand until your hand is complete. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Preparation is not cold. It is the most loving thing you can do for your future self. The 10 minutes changed my life, but the 6 weeks after the 10 minutes, the notebook, the accountant, the attorney, the dinner party, the folder in the center of the table. That's the part I'm proud of. That's the part I chose. I'm Caroline. I'm 38. I have a brain condition, an excellent neurologist, a house painted the color I always wanted, and the absolute clarity that comes from having looked at your own flat line and decided what to do next. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story touched something in you, please share it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And leave a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what you felt. Tell me your version of the 10 minutes when everything became clear. I read all of them. Every single one. See you in the next one.